Good evening, guys. It's Tuesday, August 1st. Can you believe that? We've been doing this for about 2 weeks already, and we're having a blast. It's a lot of fun just to be out here recording what we're doing, documenting kind of every step of our homesteading journey, sharing it with you guys out there. Appreciate all the support we've gotten so far. Had a ton of subscribers to start and a bunch of comments as well, which we love interacting with our audience here. So keep those comments coming. This will be my plug. Subscribe to the page if you haven't already, because we're going to continue to do this. My plan is to continue to share our journey, continue to grow and connect with the homesteading community, and continue to learn, not only just us, but to share and to hopefully teach others out there to get started with this journey. So I really appreciate everybody in the first 2 weeks of this, and we're gonna keep it going. Something doesn't seem right here. This is always wet. I don't think I hear a ram pump. Yep, definitely not. Ram pump shut off. So I swear I jinxed us. Last night I was talking about how a ram pump runs continuously at one point, and of course now it's shut off. It happens from time to time, not the end of the world. Typically you just have to prime the pump. Maybe there's a stick or some sort of debris got in there. The only thing that stinks about it is the water gets kind of warm and stagnant in there, which you don't want to let go for several days. You start getting algae buildup, things like that. So we'll get it back running, but that's for a later date, guys. We're going to talk about that a different time. Tonight I wanted to talk about, and this actually came from one of our viewers, so I love doing this. As I mentioned to start, keep the comments coming. I love to hear what you guys are interested in out there. And this was a question from one of our viewers, talking about how do we keep our pastures predator proof? What type of fencing do we use? Obviously ask it that way, but that was the basis of the question, is what do we do to prevent predators, and what are our predators in this area? So we're going to talk about our three types of fencing that we use here, and we're going to talk a little bit about kind of the pros and the cons for each of them, because each one is a little bit different, has different functionality, different, I guess you'd say, protection levels, different price points, and just overall each fence is a little bit different, and we'll kind of recommend where we see each one fitting into your homestead and what application there. So we're definitely going to talk about that tonight. All right, so three types of fencing we're using here on the farm. First one's going to be your steel woven wire, sold in rolls. Your second one's going to be electric netting, and then your last one's going to be high tensile fencing. So the first one we're going to talk about, as you see, is going to be right here. It's going to be your woven wire. This stuff is sold in rolls. We got this at Tractor Supply. I believe even Lowe's carries it from time to time. Pretty much any type of farm store you can get this stuff at. And it's basically woven into, I believe these are 2.5 inch, maybe even 3-inch squares. I'm not exactly sure, but very tightly woven, a strong, sturdy steel here. And they are sold in rolls. I think it's, I think this was 330 feet in a roll. So you can imagine this stuff rolled up, it gets extremely heavy. All right, so the pros to this fencing, it's definitely the most predator proof for your livestock. Our pigs, we don't necessarily worry about it, but it is great for keeping pigs in as well. We have two what we call corrals set up with this stuff, and it is very great protection for the sheep. The sheep are the ones that you're really going to want to protect. So this stuff does a great job. It's tightly woven here. It gets pulled very tight and kind of keeps anything out. It's 4 foot, so pretty much there's nothing really that's gonna, in this area, that's gonna get over the fence, that's gonna be any type of threat to a sheep. The only really concern would be is if they could somehow dig under, but we haven't had any issues with that. It does, like I said, sit pretty tight on the ground. It would take a lot of effort to dig down there underneath this type of fencing. Being that it is the most predator proof, it is pretty much the one main positive. Everything else is definitely a little clunky with it. You do have to drive in metal T-posts like we have back here, about every 8, 10, 12 feet, somewhere in that range, which is a lot of labor up front. Driving those T-posts in, that they can be a pain. You do have to use, I don't know if you can see here, you have to use these metal clips to kind of tie them in as well. And the biggest thing is getting it to stretch. So you're not going to stretch this fence very tight by hand. You typically are going to need some sort of tractor or truck with a come along to really get that tight. And basically what we did, we took 2 boards and you basically sandwich the fence between the 2 boards with a couple bolts that are going to run through, catch that fence, and then you kind of pull forward, you crank it tight, and that's what's going to give you a nice tight fence. Then you're going to tie it into your wood corner post, which you can see kind of behind me, to make sure that nice tight fence actually holds. So a lot of work goes into it. It is the most predator proof, like I said. It's also the most expensive. I believe a 330-foot roll is roughly $400. So you can imagine if you're gonna do a large section of this stuff, it's gonna cost you an arm and a leg. But it truly is great to have some sort of like main corral area. Our sheep just have learned to come into their side every night, which kind of gives us peace and lets us sleep comfortably at night without having to worry about any predators. And I guess another 2 quick, I guess you'd say, cons about this woven wire fence is it is permanent. Once it's in, it's in. It's going to last a long time, but you're not going to really move it. You're not going to alter kind of the shape or the layout of this fence. And if you do, you're probably going to have a pretty big mess. Second thing, weeds on the outside. You like to think on the inside, the animals are going to kind of keep the weed pressure down, but on the outside can be a little tricky weed whacking around metal. Obviously, anyone that does a lot of weed whacking knows you hit metal, it's going to really chew up your string there, or a blade if you have that on there. So you really got to come up with a way to kind of manage the weed pressure on the outside. The sheep always want to be here with us. They can explain how the electric netting works. All right, so your second fence that we use, and this is kind of your introduction, I would say, to electric, is going to be your electric netting right here. Electric netting, I will say that the pros to electric netting, very, very mobile. And I'm sure anyone that's watching this, anyone that's interested in starting raising larger livestock, I'm sure you've seen this stuff. I'm sure you see how it's used to rotationally graze animals, and move them around periodically. This stuff is very mobile. You can see the stake back here, it just picks right out of the ground. I will say it's a little tricky to gather up and bunch up. We'll put that as kind of an extra con. But this stuff is extremely mobile. It's great to use. It is pretty predator proof, believe it or not, because it is tightly wound here. But I'm not going to go as far as saying it's as predator proof as the woven wire. While it's not as sturdy as the woven wire, it is electrified. So that's going to add a little bit of a deterrence as well. Most animals aren't even going to touch or test this the strength on this netting, because as soon as they touch their nose to that netting, they're going to get a pretty good jolt. And that's going to be it. The sheep are pretty much trained to this, to the point where when we do have weeds grow up, our charge obviously goes down, and they don't even really bother with it because they already know that there's something there. Another advantage to this, aside from the mobility and kind of the initial electric charge, it is pretty affordable. I know it sounds a little much, but it's a little over $100, I believe, for roughly a 150 foot roll, depending on what you order. This comes in all different variations. It comes in sheep netting, poultry netting. There's actually pig fencing, which is significantly lower, being that pigs typically aren't going to go over. So there's really an option for any sort of application, which definitely makes it a really good choice. It's also really easy to link together, and you can see behind me, I actually have it linked together to a secondary net as we go up the side here. And all I usually do is, to make it nice and tight, I'll just take a cable tie and I'll just fasten the 2 stakes together. That way it stays together nice and tight. You can kind of pull off of it to make sure your netting's nice and tight. I would say nothing's going to go under this. You know, there's definitely not going to be any digging under an electrified fence, because at some point they're going to hit that electric wire, the hot wire there. I have seen sheep go over this, mainly when it's slouching or when they know it's not as hot as what it once was. But for the most part, there's no issues keeping the sheep in and keeping the predators out. Now to the cons. I would say one of the biggest cons is just you need to make sure you have a really clean slate when you set this stuff up. So you can't have weeds, you can't have sticks and branches kind of laying in the area, because anything that's touching that electrified wire is going to ground it out. It's going to, pull down your charge. So ours right now is very overgrown. We still have some sort of shock on it, some sort of charge, but you got to keep your area clean, which means if you're going to use it in more of a kind of permanent type situation, it means kind of moving it back and forth while you weed whack ahead of that spot. So that kind of can be a little bit of a pain moving it. But again, if you stay on top of it, it's going to pack a really good punch for you, and it's going to do a good job. I mentioned this earlier, but the second one is when you gather it up, it's very easy to get those stakes that go into the ground caught in this netting, and it can become a mess. And it also can be a mess if the netting itself actually rips. It can be a little difficult to repair. So I would definitely recommend, you take your time the first couple times. You're very careful with how you handle it. I'm still terrible with it. Quite honestly, I hate handling it, but I do like to use it. So I kind of work my way through it. I figure it out, but handling it is definitely a challenge. Now with any electric fence, you are going to need an energizer. We use this IntelliShock 60 from Premier One. It's simply just a solar panel with a battery inside that's going to produce the charge for you. Again, it packs plenty of punch, everything that we're going to need. It does power up to, I want to say like 3 rolls of fencing, 4 rolls maybe. Anything after that, you're going to significantly lose charge. They do sell larger models, and they actually, I believe, sell a smaller model, but I wouldn't recommend going smaller. Bigger is always better. Well, I shouldn't say, let me backtrack. Most of the time bigger is better in these applications, because you can always expand. You're never going to say you wish you had less power, unless you're kind of in a weird situation. But this is a pretty good charger for us. It's been running a long time out here. Just simple, face it where it's a sunny area, face it south, and you're gonna have pretty good success with it. You can see it just kind of clips onto the fencing there, and that's what's gonna give you your charge. All right, and our last method of fencing here on the farm is gonna be your high tensile wire with our timeless fence posts here. Anyone that's watching this has probably seen Greg Judy. He's endlessly promoting these fence posts, and they really are awesome. You're gonna pay a little bit more for them, but I look at it as, buy it once, don't have to worry about it. It's gonna last forever. You can see it has these pre-drilled holes in, so you can kind of set your height, whereas opposed to using a metal T-post, you're fiddling around with those insulators. Sitting long enough in the sun, those insulators, they snap. You're constantly going around, you're fixing them. They're just a pain in the neck to actually install to begin with, and to kind of fish that wire through. So these things are pretty awesome. So that's kind of where your cost is in this fence. As far as the tensile itself, relatively inexpensive, and it travels a long way. So this pasture is a 6-strand, and I want to say it's about 1/3 of an acre, and our new pasture on the other side is that's actually significantly more. All in, it's going to be 3 acres of pasture with this tensile line. So the pros to the high tensile: the first thing is you don't have to worry about the weeds as much. I don't want to say you don't have to worry about them, because it'll certainly ground out that steel wire. But your first wire is going to be, several inches off the ground. So that's obviously going to give you a little bit of a buffer room. You can get in, you can get under it with a weed whacker and keep that fence nice and clean. So that's definitely an advantage, where the woven wire, the electric netting, basically sits on the ground, and that obviously creates the challenge there. Second thing I already mentioned, the cost to this stuff is relatively inexpensive minus the posts. But again, the posts are definitely worth the investment, because they're going to last forever. They do have a little bit of flex to them, but they've proven to be really strong for us, and we've had no issues as far as anything breaking or anything trying to push them over, anything like that. Kind of to go along with the posts and how easy they are, just the ease of setting Tensile up. You can just basically need your corner braces to anchor into, and then essentially you run it and you tighten it. It is a pretty simple process. I would recommend you look into kind of how that's done. But it makes for a nice tight fence. It makes for a really nice looking fence, especially with these white posts you see down the fence line here. I just think the way this looks up here is really neat on top of our hill. And then the last one, this Tensile, probably has about the least resistance out of anything. You know, your electric netting, obviously all that fabric touching different things, you're not going to get the charge that you get on this. Right now we tested it, 7100 volts running through this. That's pretty hot. Definitely plenty to keep sheep in, and I'm really hoping keep predators out. Again, no issues to this point. You would think something touches this and it's definitely going the other direction. Now there are cons to it. It is the most, I guess you'd say, permeable. Smaller animals could definitely go through it, being that there are gaps, and depending on your spacing of the wire. We spaced our bottom 3 wires really close together, and then we kind of incrementally increased as it went up, figuring anything that is a threat to our sheep is going to typically go lower rather than try to jump through, because at that point they're going to already know it's charged and they're not going to test it. The other con, and I wouldn't say this is necessarily a con to the fence, but more so a con to the application, is you're going to use this over a large area. So the larger the area, obviously the more likelihood something falls on the fence, or a branch, a tree, something in that area falls, and obviously will cause it to ground out, cause the fence to sag, something like that. So it's something you always have to kind of check your fence. But again, that's more a product of just using it over a larger span as opposed to some of these other methods of fencing. And I guess to add to that, again, a product of just using wire over a long stretch and several different wires that are going to be hot, you need a really good sized charger, which is going to come at a cost as well. So all things to consider when you really think about your fence. They all do great. They all have their own application. Again, I would say the most predator proof is going to be your woven wire for sure, being that it's so tight, it's so sturdy, so secure. Your electric netting is going to be great for mobile use, moving your animals around. It's also a great interior fence for pasture. So if you have a strong perimeter and you use the electric netting on the inside, works wonders. And then your high tensile is going to be great for your large pastures, used as a perimeter. You can connect off of your tensile. I actually have our electric netting tied in right here. You can see the clip. That's kind of how that's tied in, just because this side isn't finished off. But they're all great fences. We have had great success so far. Now, aside from fencing, there is a couple other things you can do to kind of up your level of protection for your livestock. And the first one, and this is what the viewer actually asked as well in the comments, the livestock guardian dog. I'm mixed on how I feel about the livestock guardian dog. Right now in our application, it's just not necessary. We don't have enough animals. The pasture is probably not big enough, and just to add that extra cost on feed and things like that, just not really willing to do right now. There also requires a lot of training for that dog to be, I guess you'd say, safe to be around. Definitely have had experience around them, and they can be very aggressive towards people as well if you don't spend the time with them, if they don't recognize you. At the end of the day, they're trying to protect their herd, their flock, whatever the animal is. So you definitely have to have them trained to at least you. I do think there's definitely some benefits to having a livestock guardian dog. I mean, obviously just having another form of protection out in the pasture, more so vocal. They're going to see something, they're going to let you know. I think there's huge value in that. But again, right now, that's just not the direction we're ready to head. So either way, I do think there's value, but it's definitely something that you really need to consider. You need to consider how you're going to feed the animal. And another method of added protection that we actually do use, and I just put in last week, is your simple trail cams. You see them everywhere. You can pick them up pretty much anywhere. A trail cam is going to kind of give you eyes in the areas that you're not going to normally see. So we have it on a far corner of our fencing, and I check it every couple days. Again, fortunately, nothing on there that's any type of threat. So definitely a good method to kind of put those around. In fact, I do want to get more trail cams. They are relatively inexpensive, and again, they're great eyes because you're not always going to be out here, and they're going to catch anything that walks by. Last thing I'll say about security tonight is really try to plan your location for your pastures. There's going to be some areas that are just going to be better if you can get it closer to your house. I know that's not always the ideal situation, but the closer to your house you get, the less of a likelihood there is that there's going to be a predator, being that they're going to have they're going to sense all that scent around. They're going to know people are around. There's going to be a lot more activity in the area. Now, obviously, if you do have a larger chunk of land and you're stretching away from your home, that's a different story. But in a lot of instances on smaller homesteads, you can keep this stuff pretty close to your house. And a lot of people have your typical dog as a pet, which almost act as a livestock guardian dog in that instance. So also something to consider there. All right, guys, so we talked about our methods of fencing. Hopefully that provides value to you. Hopefully that gives you a bit of comfort in knowing where to begin. We're protecting from coyotes here. I guess technically you could say bears, bobcats, but they would have to be extremely desperate to get after our animals. It would mainly be coyotes. Right now they are thriving in our area due to increasing deer population. But again, like I've been saying several times throughout, we haven't had any issues. Really no signs in the immediate area. You know, we hear them at night in the distance, but nothing that seems like an immediate threat to our animals. So we're going to continue up what we're doing. We're going to make sure our fence stays hot. I think that's a huge step in protecting your animals. Make sure you're checking your fence regularly. And that's kind of where we're at. So hopefully this video helps you guys. If you like what we're doing, please subscribe to our channel. Really enjoyed this one tonight because it was a question from one of our viewers. So I just thought it was fun to kind of provide my insight, give as much information as I possibly could, and kind of continue to grow with this community. So thanks for watching, guys. As always, have a great night.